a licensed physician in the state of Georgia. I have a specialty in pathology, a subspecialty in forensic pathology, also known as death investigation. And my current position, which I've held for the last 18 years, is as a chief medical examiner for DeKalb County.
And during your time, approximately, how many autopsies have you conducted throughout your career?
Approximately 12,000.
And I believe you already said this, but you are board certified, correct?
I'm board certified in the fields of anatomic pathology, clinical pathology, and most importantly, forensic pathology.
You said you have done quite a few autopsies. Of those that you've done, how many have been of children?
Children?
Yes.
Several hundred. Those that die naturally, those that die by motor vehicle accident, quite a bit of those. Those that die by the means of somebody else, homicidally died. And then a few that actually commit suicide in their relatively young years. So if I had to guess at a number, it would be 500-600 total children autopsy.
And let's narrow that down into a subsection of how many children that have been drowning victims. How many autopsies have you performed in that subsection?
50 or 60. Most of the kids, Ms. Racine, that I'd see that drown will drown in some community swimming pool, or we do some work for Hall County, they'll drown in Lake Lanier. Most of the drownings are accidental drownings. It wasn't being properly monitored while they were at the pool or something to that effect.
Okay. And approximately how many times have you testified and been qualified as an expert in DeKalb County?
DeKalb County? Well, I'm not so sure I know that number, but I can tell you that overall 600 times at least.
Okay.
Here in Georgia, I've testified in over 100 counties just in Georgia. And I've testified in 21 other states, so if you add them all up, it's probably around 600.
And have you testified for both the state and the defense?
I have, many times.
Now, did you have an occasion to perform the autopsy on Kente Williams?
I did.
And do you recall the date?
Let me get my report out, Counsel.
Well, let me help out with that as well. I know that you have your own carry-on. I also want to show you what's remarked in Case Exhibit 94. And do you recognize that document?
States 94 is the written part of my autopsy report without the computerized body diagrams.
Okay.
Attached.
And I want to show you what's been marked as States Exhibits 95 through 98. You recognize these documents?
These are four body diagrams. First of all, I do recognize.
Okay. And what are those?
There are four body diagrams that were generated by one of my staff. They're computerized. I'll do a rough sketch, and then they'll make a computerized diagram in color out of my rough sketch. And then these will be attached as the last pages of my autopsy report. So if you read through the autopsy report, you can also flip to the diagrams and understand where some of the injuries are, where some of the other findings are. It's just an aid to better understand the autopsy report.
And so are States 94 through 98 fair and accurate copies of the actual report and diagrams associated with Kente Williams' autopsy?
They are.
And Judge, at this time would ask submitted as evidence States 94 through 98.
Submitted without objection.
And you have copies of the same, correct, Dr. Gallo?
I'm about to pull one out right now, my autopsy report.
All right. And I think the last question I led off with was, what was the date of the autopsy?
Let's see here. The autopsy was performed on May 1st, a Monday, 2017, and we began the examination at 8:30 in the morning.
Okay. And all of your findings based off of that examination were memorialized in State's Exhibit 94, is that correct?
They are.
Okay. And is it standard to also take photographs during an autopsy?
It is. Everybody that ever comes through the DeKalb office gets at least one photograph, and some people get many more than that.
If you could just briefly explain for the jury the process of once a child is pronounced dead, say at CHOA, Eggleston Hospital, what is the procedure for that child then to come to the medical examiner's office?
Yeah, assuming that the death is in our jurisdiction, which this obviously was, there will be a call placed by somebody at CHOA, usually a nurse or a physician, to my office, and that reporting person will speak to one of my investigators. One of my investigators will take some information down on all kid deaths. One of my investigators will respond to the hospital. They will secure the body. They will arrange for the body to be transported back to the DeKalb morgue for an examination by me or one of my other physicians. And then they'll generate a report. It's called the investigative report. Basically, it's to help me understand what happened to the deceased person. And they will have some interviews in that report with witnesses. They may put in the report what some doctor or nurse told them. They'll put their own opinions in there from time to time. And then that report will be ready for me when I come in the morning, so I can read it over and have an idea of what we're looking for in each particular death. And sometimes if the investigator is there, they will actually attend the autopsy.
And was an investigative summary provided to you for Kente Williams' case?
It was.
Okay. And explain to the jury what is a cause of death.
Cause of death is a medical opinion. Did someone get shot? Did they die from a motor vehicle accident? Did they have a heart attack? Those are all medical opinions which I and my other physicians will offer. But you know, we also offer a legal opinion, and to sign a death certificate you have to have both the medical opinion as to the cause of death, and then you have to have a more or less legal opinion in what is known as the manner of death. The manner of death is divided into 5 categories. There's suicidal manners, where someone takes their own life. There's accidental manners, where someone dies because the environment around them is hostile, like a motor vehicle accident. There are natural manners of death: pneumonia, blood clot in your lung, heart attack. Then there are homicidal manners of death, where someone has taken the life of another person. And then occasionally, despite our best efforts, we cannot determine a manner of death, and we call that manner undetermined. In essence, Ms. Racine, what we do after we generate an autopsy report and get up any other information we need, we reduce our findings to writing, and then either I or one of my physicians, other physicians, will sign a death certificate indicating our opinions with respect to the cause of death and the manner of death. And of course, that's what we did in this case.
And for Kente Williams, what was his cause of death that you found based on your autopsy?
Drowning.
And what about his manner of death?
Homicide, again, the taking of a life by another person.
And you stated that would have been indicated on the death certificate, is that correct?
That's correct, on the official document declaring someone's dead.
Okay. You've discussed that photographs are typically taken, correct?
I'm sorry, Ms. Racine, I didn't hear what you said.
I'm sorry, photographs are taken, correct?
Oh, many. In this case, many.
And you had an opportunity to flip through State's Exhibits 100 through 158, correct?
Correct.
And are those fair and accurate copies of the photographs that were taken during the autopsy of Kente Williams?
They are.
And Judge, this time we'd ask to admit into evidence State's Exhibits 100 through 158.
Judge, if new exception has been preceded on our last hearing.
The rule is the same way as this is.
State's Exhibit 100. the jury what is the significance of they do that?
This is what we call an identification photograph. If the deceased is suitable, they get an identification photograph. And what that means is you clean the body of any debris, blood, mud, whatever might be on the body. You try to take a face-on photograph that fills the entire frame. And then underneath the chin of the person, you place a placard. The placard here has the unique case number that was assigned to Kente Williams at the time of the autopsy, actually at the time that the investigator took the report. And you can see on the placard, the number is 17-0611. What that means is that death occurred in 2017. That's what the 17 is for. The 0611 means that this was the 611th death reported to our office in the year 2017. Everybody that passes through my office gets a unique case number. In fact, everybody that's reported gets a unique case number. And why is that? That's because people come in with one name, 3 names, sometimes 10 names, but the case number never changes. So all evidence submitted on any particular decedent may be submitted with their name, but it's also submitted with their unique case number.
And on his lip, it appears to be blood on there, correct?
Yeah, blood and probably some abrasion, scraping of the mucous membrane as well. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
Could that have been from medical intervention?
Well, I think it is most likely. You know, there was an aggressive resuscitation of Kente Williams in which at one point there was a tube placed down his throat. We have other photographs, I don't know if we're going to publish them, but there was a tube exiting his mouth when I first saw him. If you look at the part of his lip that's white, it's kind of on the bottom, near the middle, that's exactly where the endotracheal tube was lying on his lip. So it caused a furrow or an indentation in his lip. And when people are resuscitated, it can get traumatic sometimes. There are things that can happen to them that would appear as injuries, because, well, actually they are injuries. And I would submit to you, Mr. Racine, any injuries to his lower lip and probably any to his upper lip are more likely due to resuscitation than anything else.
State's Exhibit 104, in this photograph, what was being documented?
Can I draw on that, or is that?
Yes.
Okay. There you go. Couple of things. Right there is a red bruise, a fresh bruise on the side of his face. He also has white scars on the side of his face. He has another bruise, doesn't show quite as well, but it's up there, it's right up there. So what we're seeing in States 104 are bruises to the forehead, a bruise to the forehead, a bruise to his left cheek, and then some old scars. And when I say old, you know, once a scar heals, and that's usually in 3 or 4 weeks, it looks the same pretty much for the rest of your life. So there's no really way to age it other than to say it's probably greater than 3 to 4 weeks old.
And then in State's Exhibit 101, this is a close-up of those same injuries.
Yeah, and in fact, I think I need to clarify something before we go on. In darkly pigmented individuals, it is often very difficult to see bruises because of the skin pigmentation. So sometimes you have to shoot a number of photographs at different angles, different lighting, and sometimes the bruises show better, or sometimes the injuries show better, depending on the lighting, the angle, and how close you are. And in this case, you can see much better here, right there, at the left side of his nose.
Then State's Exhibit 102, what side of the face is being captured here?
Well, we're looking at Kente Williams' head from the other side, on the right side. And Ms. Beal, how do I get rid of the red lines here?
It's a great question. There you go.
Okay.
And let me go back to this. All right.
Another bruise there. Scars on his face here. So we're looking at old and new injuries to him. The old one's being on the right cheek, the new one being on the right side of his forehead.
And then 103, what is the purpose of that image?
Yeah, all we did here was put a ruler on the right forehead and outlined the bruise with the ruler. You can see, we took this in a different light. Bruise doesn't show up very well in this particular photograph. It's still there, but it's just harder to see.
Then 105,
Yeah, this is let me orient the jury to what we're looking at. We're looking at the base of the left side of Kente's neck, right here, on me. And there's a scrape mark here.
let me switch back.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
There's a scrape mark right there, which is going to become important later on in my testimony.
Then, State's Exhibit 106.
Yeah, this particular photograph would just be to show there's nothing on the left side of his chest. It's acute, nothing new.
And then I want to go quickly through 107, the purpose of taking 108, 109, and 110.
Okay, we can run through these fairly quickly. You have to examine the child completely. Part of that examination is examination of the back. And I want to see what medical devices are on that child before you can get started with him. So to make a long story short, we can see in this particular photograph, there's a blood pressure cuff or some type of a cuff around his right leg, right lower leg. There's a defibrillator contact pad on his back. And I want to be sure that when I examine his back more thoroughly that any injuries I see are not underlying some medical device, and that's what caused them. Just like we talked about in the tracheal tube in the mouth, and injuries to the lip, most likely due to that medical device. I'm sorry, Tasha, could you go back forward?
Sure, for example, this pressure...
Yeah, see, here, if you recall earlier, that's a square, more or less square, maybe rectangular indentation in the skin caused by the defibrillator contact pad. Yes, here we go.
And then I want to show you...
So-
go ahead.
Yeah, so one of my jobs as a medical examiner, examining a child, is to be able to the best of my ability, separate out what injuries were inflicted by someone else, what injuries might be innocently occurring on a child at play, particularly someone 10 years old, and then what injuries might be due to cardiopulmonary resuscitation. And I think in Kente you can see all three of those type of things.
Next is 111, and in this image there's a skin discoloration on his buttocks versus the rest of his body.
Yeah,
Can you
sure.
explain to the jury what that is?
Look at his butt.
Oh, let me switch to you. Go ahead.
Butt looks relatively pale. That's because Kente has spent some time on his backside, and his buttocks have been in contact, most likely with the autopsy table in my office. So what happens there, the blood is not allowed to settle to the dependent areas by gravity to his buttocks because they're in contact with the table, so the blood cannot settle there. But on the back of his legs, which are not in contact with the autopsy table, and then even some parts of his back, which are not in contact with the autopsy table, there's going to be a settling of the blood by gravity. After you die, you don't have a blood pressure, you don't have a pulse, and gravity is going to take the blood to the most dependent areas in the body. In medical terminology, it's called lividity, or livor mortis. It's the discoloration, the engorgement of blood vessels on the dependent area of the body. So in him, back of the legs, the lumbosacral area of the back, but not the buttocks, because his buttocks would be lying right atop the autopsy table. So these discolorations are just what I would expect post-mortem in someone that's been dead for a number of hours.
And do you recall if you were ever told what his actual date of death was versus the time that the autopsy was performed? How many days are we talking?
He died on April 28th, and we didn't do the autopsy till May 1st.
State Exhibit 112, again, is that documenting injuries observed to the back of his leg?
Yeah, we are here. Mr. C, can you get rid of the circles again?
Yep, sorry.
Now, we're going to look at these in bigger detail, I'm fairly certain, but there's a cluster of injuries here and a bruise here, and probably another bruise there. But the important thing here is that we're going to show that there's a pattern to some of those injuries.
And then Stacy's over 113.
Oh, see, move it that way, just towards the jury just a little bit. There you go. Once again, from my earlier testimony, depends on the light, how well you see the injuries. This is the same photograph that she just showed a minute ago. And I would hope you can see the injuries much better in this one than he did in the previous one. And we're talking about a cluster of patterned injuries here, and then a red-purple bruise there. There are other injuries to the feet, but we have better photographs. But you see, just by shooting this at a different angle and different light, we've got much better delineation of the wounds.
Next we have 114.
We've turned it around just a hair. The left leg is on top, and the right leg is on the bottom. And once again, right in here is that cluster of pattern injuries that we talked about. And we'll talk about some more.
Then 115.
Ooh. Now, here we still have medical devices attached to Kente's body. And the idea behind this photograph is not really to show you the medical devices. The idea behind this photograph, in particular, is to show you that wound. I think even from across the room, that wound has more or less an inverted V shape to it. It's a patterned injury. And one of my charges as a medical examiner is to be able to look at wounds and determine, does this show a pattern? I mean, if you showed me an object, can I match it up? Or is this just a nondescript wound that would be difficult to match to any one particular object? Well, you show me that wound, show me some objects, I can probably match it up. And also, there's another one, less well seen, but another one there. Remember, when you're going to get a patterned injury, and let's take an easy example. If you're going to get struck with something, for the injury on the body to look like the object that made it, it has to strike it at a 90-degree angle. If it strikes it at some other angle, you're going to get an injury, but it's not going to look much like what made that injury.
Then 116. It's the same side of the...
Same thing, where you see here, it doesn't show up quite as well, but we're talking about the same thing. An inverted U or an inverted V-shaped injury, and we're looking at his flank, his left flank right here, kind of a little on the back, a little on the side.
And then 117, is that a
Close up of the same thing, but I think it shows it very well. I can see it from here constantly. You know, not on my screen, on the screen up there, I can see it from here.
Okay. And then 118. Is that another injury in the same area?
Yeah, another injury in the same area.
119. What are we looking at here?
Okay, we're looking at the back of his left leg in a different light. I'll be happy to outline them again, but it's the same bruises that we've seen before. Oops.
Now, to facilitate, you said that as part of your actual autopsy report that you actually chart it out, and then you have somebody who makes a digital copy of the...
Yeah, I'll do a rough sketch of this, and then, I forget what exhibits they were constituted, but we introduced in 95 through 98 or something like that, that show in an artist's rendition, so to speak, where the injuries are. Yeah,
Sorry, I'm trying to...
Well, no, I would turn it the other way. There you go. We can always move it up and down. But what we've tried to do here is show you where the injuries are on a body diagram. It's a heck of a lot easier to see them on the diagram than it is on the photograph sometimes. But to make a long story short, the ones we're talking about, we talked about them earlier, are these bruises around his leg, the pattern injury on the back of his thigh, the pattern injury on the left side of the back and flank, and then other injuries that we see that don't have the pattern. All the ones on the back that I pointed out that I said, I don't know who made them, it's a bruise, but I'm not sure who made them. So out of all these injuries, I can look at least 2 and maybe 3, maybe 4 that have a pattern to them. But there's a lot more injuries than that. They just don't have any particular pattern.
Now, your diagram is color-coded. What is the distinction between the red and the blue?
Oh yeah, the blue are scars. They're old injuries. I don't know how he got them. probably don't really relate to his death in any way. And then the red ones are the ones that I believe are recent. And when I say recent, anywhere from a few minutes to a few days. Bruises look the same for quite a while.
When you say a few minutes, that's referring to the time of death, not the time of autopsy?
No, time they were inflicted.
Okay. And so when you say a few minutes, is a person able to bruise post-mortem?
No. What is a bruise? Let me just start here. A bruise is a rupture of blood vessels underneath the skin. If you're going to bleed underneath the skin, there's two things you need, a blood pressure and a pulse. When you're dead, you don't have either one. So if you hit a dead body with a blunt object, you're not going to get a bruise because there's no pulse and no blood pressure. There's no way for that to happen. The blood vessels under the skin might rupture, but there's not going to be any pumping action from the heart that's going to allow blood to accumulate underneath the skin, and what we see is called a bruise. So a long answer to a simple question, but no, you can't.
And then State's Exhibit 96, this is also showing recent and remote bruises.
Yeah, we looked at several photographs here, remember? I said they had kind of an inverted shaped V or inverted U-shaped engine. We just tried to, put those on the diagram. And, Mr. C, could you drop it down maybe an inch?
Sure, let me get rid of these circles.
And think back to the earliest photographs we showed. Remember there were a number of bruises that we saw.
Sorry, there you go.
A number of bruises that we saw on the left side of the face, and then some also on the right side of the face. What we've done here is we've taken the same body diagram that we were looking at front and back, we've rotated it 90 degrees, so now we're looking at left side and right side, and those that are on the side of the body, I think a better diagram when you have a diagram in this orientation. So anyway, just pointing out bruises that we've already looked at on photographs.
And then 97.
Yeah, let me explain what it is. When we examine someone's head internally, we make an incision from the one ear all the way across the top of the head to the other ear. And then the scalp is cut forward, the scalp is cut back. That's what this artist's rendition shows. We do that to see if there's bruises on the scalp that you cannot see before you do that. You cannot see them from the outside of the body. So in here, on the left side of the scalp, there were a couple of small bruises here, and then maybe, not maybe, but then one small one in the front, right, just above between the eyes, and then another one in the more right frontal area, and then another one on the back of the head. So while these are relatively small injuries, I think you can make some case for these being patterned. Look at the ones on the bottom right-hand corner. There's 4 circular bruises in a cluster.
And let me ask you this, Dr. Garrett, when in that imagery, is that related to, because once those cuts are made, the skin is actually peeled down, correct?
The scalp is actually peeled forward and back.
And so where those are indicated, although they're there on the scalp, where would they be located on the actual head of the individual?
The one in the 10 o'clock and the one in the 6 o'clock position, left-hand diagram, that's exactly where they are. They would be here, and then another one would be here in the back of the head. Now, the ones on the right-hand side of the diagram.
If you could circle it, just so we know which one.
Yeah, sure. I've already got the 2 circled here. The ones on the right-hand side of the diagram are actually the left-hand side of the body. They're located over in the temple region, here and here.
And then states 98, this says soft tissue bruises seen by posterior dissection. Can you explain to the jury what that means?
Sure. Many bruises that involve darkly pigmented people are awfully difficult to see on the back. Awfully difficult to see just about anywhere, but the back is usually something that we don't make cuts in. But in certain victims of homicides, we do make a cut. We begin at the back of the neck and open up the back, the buttocks, the arms, and the legs, pretty much like we do the front of the body. And when we do that, sometimes we find injuries that you could not see unless you perform that procedure. That procedure is called a posterior or a back section. So what I saw in this one were actually several things. A large bruise
Underneath that picture we showed of the inverted V or the inverted U-shaped injury, there's a bruise underneath that. Because you really couldn't see much from the outside. Then there's another bruise which becomes very important to me later. On the back of the shoulder, overlying the shoulder blade. You know, you couldn't see that at all. And when we cut into it, there was no bleeding into the skin, no bleeding into the underlying what we call subcutaneous fat. All the bleeding in there was in the muscle overlying the shoulder blade. It's what we call a deep bruise, not superficial, it's very deep. And then there was another smaller one like that up here. And then there was a couple of ones that I would call nondescript, although the one on the leg, the left thigh, was in the area of one of the other injuries that we showed earlier, underneath one of the injuries.
And as part of your autopsy, do you also at times collect evidence from other investigating agencies, law enforcement agencies, to compare with injuries that you see within your autopsy or to make further determinations?
Sure. As part of our protocol for child deaths, we obtain medical records, we obtain the original police report, perhaps the 911 call, I think that's important, the ambulance trip sheet, nowadays called the patient care report, all of that.
What about clothing?
Oh, yeah.
And in this case, was clothing collected for your findings?
They were brought to me, let me check some.
Well, and I'll also approach while you're checking, it states 122 through 125. Do you recall if these were brought to the NE's office?
Okay. All right. Well, let me look at these first. Well, let's see, 122 through 125 are depictions of a white short-sleeved shirt, front and back, and a pair of more white or off-white pants, front and back. These items of clothing were brought to us during the autopsy examination, and we looked at them at that time and made some notes on page 3 of my autopsy report and took some photographs.
And I just want to quickly go through 122, 123, that's the front and back of that white shirt,
Correct.
and 124 and 125 is the front and back of the pants.
So the pants.
Okay.
Correct.
And do you recall if you also received belts?
We did. In fact, we received 7 of them. 2 of the belts were leather, and the other 5 were various colors and made out of cloth, and all 7 of the belts had a metallic buckle.
Okay. And I want to just quickly go through those 126, 127, and 128 appear to be the same belt.
Yeah, that's all the same belt.
Okay. And then 120, trying to figure out the best way to do this.
No, that's fine. It's just another photograph of a different belt. Remember, I had 7 of them.
129, 130, 131 being a second leather belt.
Correct.
Okay. And then you mentioned that there were several cloth belts, 132, does that
That's one of
appear to
them.
be one of the ones that you tested? 133 as well,
Correct.
134, 135, and 136, all being belts that you examined to see if they could be consistent with injuries to the victim.
Exactly.
Okay. I want to show you what's been marked as states 137. Can you explain to the jury the relevance of this photograph?
Sure. That's the back of Kente's leg, the left leg. We've looked at it before. And we put the buckle of the belt. And can you give me the red circle, or red,
Oh,
the
sorry.
ability to put the
Yes.
circle on again?
Maybe. There you go.
And we looked at the belt in that particular photograph, and we put it up next to the wound. Well, you know, at least part of that belt could have made those injuries. If if you look at where the buckle part is, not the end of the buckle, but this part right here, if that struck Kente at an angle, I know you could have produced that injury, or that injury, or even that injury. Any one of those could have been produced by the edge of that belt. Remember what I said earlier? Show me the injury, it's a pattern. Show me the object you think might have made it, and we'll sit down and look and see if it makes sense. In this case, it may make sense.
Can you give the jury a brief explanation of when you're saying it matches? Obviously, we may not be able to see a direct imprint, an exact duplication of that.
Yeah.
Can you explain to them how you're able to match it?
Well, sure. It's never going to look exactly like the belt buckle, the bruise. It may look a lot like it, but it's never going to look like it exactly because the skin has a certain amount of elasticity. It depends on the force in which the belt is wielded. But when you can look at this and say that there's nothing inconsistent with the injuries on the back of the thigh, on the back of the calf, and the edge of the belt buckle, that's about as good as we're going to be able to get it. Is there anything inconsistent with that? Well, no, I don't see anything inconsistent. Could it have been a different belt and a different buckle? Well, sure it could. But if you're showing me this one, it fits.
And I want to approach you with what's been previously marked as States Exhibit 85, bag of belts. Does this belt appear to be the same belt that's pictured in States Exhibit that you're speaking
Oh,
of?
it's 137.
And does that appear to be that same belt?
Yes, this is the same one that I'm talking about. And may I, well, if you could see the edge of this buckle. May I?
Dr. Gabby,
Yeah,
can I
okay,
see
yeah.
Judge, just fit, is that okay?
Yes.
What I want to show you on the edge of the buckle is this thing looks like a little triangle. We're looking at this little piece of the buckle right here, triangular shaped piece of metal on it. Now, what you have to do after you see that is go back. Go back and look at these injuries. They're almost the same shape as a little triangular piece of metal on the edge of the buckle. You know, a lot of people think, well, if you're wielding your buckle, it's going to be like that. But it also could be on the edge. And there is nothing inconsistent with those injuries with respect to the edge of this buckle.
And then the other photographs that you took as part of your autopsy, we go through those. 130. What are we looking at here?
Same thing, I think we
Let me get the
overlaid
thing.
it a little too much on the back of the left calf.
Okay. 139.
Okay, 139, let me orient you to where we are here. To my left, and y'all's left, is the head. To my right are the feet. These are the injuries that we looked at on the back earlier. Remember I said they didn't really have a pattern, the bruises, but I don't know exactly how they got there. You know, if you roll up that belt.
I also want to show you 141 while you're talking.
Oh, okay. If you roll up that belt, the way that my assistant has it rolled up there, those injuries could have certainly been produced by the edge of the belt.
And then 141
Same thing. We're just showing the same thing again.
and 142.
142, now we're looking back at his left side, left flank part of his body, and we have an injury. You remember I said he had an inverted U-shaped injury? If you look at this injury right here, and, well, I don't have the ability to draw around it.
Hold on 1 second. Sorry. I think if you touch on your screen on the squiggle lines area, you might be able to switch it as well.
Okay.
But it's on now.
Yeah, I see what they have. Right. That's one of those inverted U-shaped injuries. Well, look at the tongue of the belt. That and that injury look pretty much the same to me. So there's nothing inconsistent with the injury on the left side of his flank being produced by the tongue of the belt.
And is that matching another injury to his flank?
That's right, another injury, a little different location, same area of the body. So he has pattern injuries there which are consistent with being produced by the belt that we're holding in question.
Now, 145, for that belt buckle, it appears to be different than the one we previously showed, correct?
Yeah, that was a different belt we took.
Okay. Let me,
It's not going to behave for me.
there you go. And the belt that you have pictured in 145, does that appear to be one of the belts that's located in Stacy's exhibit when we previously talked about this one right here?
Yeah, this is a different belt, but the general configuration of the belt is pretty much the same. There's a leather piece, there's a metal piece that you buckle it with. This one could have produced the injury that we see just below it, which is right here.
And is this an image actually matching up?
Yeah,
to
it's a
that
much
injury?
better shot because it shows the wound better right here.
I want to show you next, although not on the body, comparisons made to the victim's clothing and the belt.
Correct.
And tell me what you all did here.
We laid out Kente's white shirt. There wasn't much on the front of it that I was impressed with, but on the back of it, there sure was.
And if you don't mind stepping down that same belt that I previously gave you. Then where you were able to match what you saw. You see, just mind come hold the shirt. We can hold it for you. Remember, I can hold it.
Just hold it up like that. Anyone see a pattern? Right here. See two parallel black lines and then this black line? Yeah, sure. Here's the two parallel black lines, and then another one that's rectangular shaped and elevated. See what piece is going. That's what's making this. And this part here. Yeah, we'll come down. We won't let you get your chance. That's part of the belt there. I feel very confident in testifying that. I don't know if he was wearing the shirt or not, but at some time this belt came in contact with the shirt, produced that pattern on the shirt. Yeah, sometimes you have to look, but it does come up. Look, we have these two black lines here, and this rectangular shaped black line here. That part of the belt, if you put the tongue through, you got two black lines, would be that, and the two parallel lines. It's pretty well in here. You know, on the clothes, the patterns come out better than they do on the body because the clothes are generally not elastic like the body is. And they will reproduce the pattern more accurately than the skin.
And that's also captured in 148, correct? That same discussion you just
Yeah, it's a shame it doesn't show up all that well because it's so light. And there you go, different light.
149
And it's just what we just talked about. You got one parallel.
and 150.
Yeah, you have one parallel line here and the other down here, and then you have this rectangular part of the belt, where the loop part where you put your the tongue of it through after you buckle it.
Next, I want to talk about some other injuries that you observed to Kensei during your autopsy. And if you could explain to the jury your findings medically as to the injuries. First, we'll start with 151.
Sure. There are, and I'll put a circle around them in just a second, but we're looking at the left foot, the top of the left foot, the left ankle of Kente, and he has second-degree burns in both of those areas. This entire part of his foot is burned. The skin is getting ready to peel off and slough off. Here, the skin has already sloughed off. And this is like a really bad sunburn that you might have gotten at the beach. You didn't put on your copper tone. The skin has been blistered to the point where the top layer is dead, and then it's going to peel off.
152?
Same foot, or left foot. And I think this photo shows a better depiction of how extensive the injury is. It goes.
Sorry.
Help.
There you go.
It goes all the way through here. I mean, it involves most of the top of the foot. The skin just hasn't peeled off there like it has on the third toe. But if I rubbed up against that during the autopsy, the skin would come right off.
Let's talk a little bit about what factors could cause, well, before we do that, let's also look at 153.
Left foot again, we're looking at the ankle. Remember, we looked at it face on, and we could see some blistering. And then here, now we see a much better depiction of the blister on the side, outside of the left ankle, where most of the skin has sloughed off. And then we have the underlying, what we call the dermis, part of the skin. It's red, angry looking because it's been burned.
And then I want to show you State's Exhibit 54.
54, we're looking at the top of the right foot.
55. Keep going. Oh,
Yeah. What we're seeing in 55, we're looking at the left leg. He's up on his right side. And we have the, oops. Yeah, I need your help.
there you go.
We have the burn here, but also, we haven't talked about this much. And 3 circular bruises here. Maybe it's time for me to say why I keep emphasizing those 3 circular bruises. To get these burned, you have to be held. You have to be held. H-E-L-D, hold or held down, or held in some manner. And when I see all these circular injuries on the calves of somebody, I have to think in my head, how did they get there? Look, I've had kids, probably most of you all have had kids. My kid was 10 years old, they had a lot of bruises on their leg, but they didn't have all these circular pattern bruises. So if you're going to get these kind of injuries to the feet, nobody's just going to let you do it. You have to hold it in some manner.
Let me show you 156. Can you tell us what that is?
Bottom of the right foot,
And 157.
bottom of the left foot,
Why are those significant?
because there's no injuries to them.
Now, I'm sorry, go ahead.
All of the injuries with respect to second-degree burns are on the tops of the feet. The bottom of the feet are pristine. That was important to me.
Tell the jury why.
How do you get such injuries? If you took somebody and filled up a tub with hot water and put their feet in it, don't you think you'd get injuries on both sides of the feet, the tops and the bottoms? So if you don't have injuries on the bottoms, I have to think of another mechanism as to how these injuries occurred. And the one that comes to my mind is that the spigot was turned on. Your feet were probably planted on the enamel part of the tub while the water dripped down on top of your feet. So you've got second-degree burns on the tops of your feet, and you've got nothing on the bottoms of your feet. So Mr. Scene or anybody would have come to me and said, was he submerged in hot water, his feet submerged in hot water? The answer is no, they were not. Some other mechanism, probably the spigot mechanism.
And
And then after that, it kind of thins out in a hurry as to how you got those injuries.
so let's talk a little bit more about that. At what temperature would the water have to be in order to cause those injuries to the severity that you observed?
Sure. At 140 degrees, you can get injuries like this in 1 second. At 130, 2 or 3 seconds. And then at 120, probably a little bit more, 5, 6 seconds. Not very long. And I don't know that most hot water heaters go up to 140.
But
Some of them just have a dial that says hot, and it doesn't really tell you what the temperature, hotter or cooler. Doesn't really tell you what the temperature is.
Let me ask you this though, in your earlier testimony, you said that you believed that he had to be held, and you talked about children and that type of thing, but what is it that makes you believe that Kente's feet were held underneath this hot water coming out of the spigot?
Because if his feet were just there and the spigot was turned on, he'd move. Wouldn't you all? If I opened up the spigot at 130 degrees, as soon as that water hit your foot, you'd move it. But if you didn't move it for a couple of seconds, somebody had to hold you there. Or you had to be unconscious. But I've got these bruises on the lower legs, on the calves, that look like finger marks to me. You know, I've got these injuries that I believe, and I think most reasonable people believe, that you had to be held to get these injuries, because even if it only takes 2 or 3 seconds, look, how many of you touch a hot pot and you pull your hand away, you have next to nothing in the way of an injury, you certainly don't have anything like this. And so we had to be held for a while to have these injuries happen. Not terribly long, you know, a few seconds here and there. And I don't know what the temperature of the water is. I don't think anybody does.
And if, let me strike that. Dr. Gale, let's next discuss, you found these injuries, we discussed the pattern injuries that you located as well as charted. I want to talk about your findings regarding the cause of death being drowning. Based on your expert opinion, how long would it take for a child of Kente's age and size, which, speaking of which, how old was he and what was his height and weight?
He was 10 years old, and he was 54 inches. That's 4 feet 6 inches tall, and he was 72 pounds.
Considering those measurements, how long do you think it would take for Kente to drown to death?
Several minutes.
And when
He's got an inhaler of water to include a lot of the air sacs in his lungs, so he's not getting oxygen to his lungs and not getting delivered to the rest of his body. That's not going to happen in just a minute. Most people can hold their breath for a minute. The findings at the autopsy, Ms. Racine, indicate that he drowned to death. That's number one, and I can go over those if you so desire. But I know from my not personal experience, from my professional experience, that it takes a while for somebody to drown. You don't just drown. It's not like the burns on his feet 2 or 3 seconds. We're talking 2 or 3 minutes, and probably more than that.
And so hypothetically, if there was an admission of submerging a child for 30 to 45 seconds 2 times, based on your medical opinion, what would you say about that assertion?
Did that cause drowning?
Correct. Did that cause
Did that cause drowning? I doubt it.
So what do you think then it would take in comparison to what that person stated?
A significantly longer period of time. And that's because you're not going to die from drowning in just 45 seconds.
So is it in your professional opinion that if somebody admitted to holding a person underwater, that it would not be accurate to say it's 30 to 45 seconds, it would be accurate to say that they held that child underwater even longer?
Even longer, and who's going to hold somebody underwater time? I mean, that's just a guess, I would think.
Let's talk a little bit about your findings that led you to the determination of drowning. Explain what, if anything, you found in Kente's lungs. Let's start with that.
Can I back it up just a second?
Sure.
Remember what she asked me earlier, what other things do we look at? One of the other things we look at is the ambulance trip report. AMR is the transport in this case. You read their trip report. Because when they went to put the endotracheal tube, the tube going from his mouth into his lungs, or into his windpipe, they saw water in the windpipe. So that's the first thing that I look at. The next thing, if you have access to the little sinus behind your nose, it's called the sphenoid sinus. Oftentimes when someone drowns, water will get into the sphenoid sinus. Kente had water in
has sphenoid sinus. Now I got two things. EMS report with water and sphenoid sinus. The next thing I have is the lungs, the most important thing. Kenty's lungs were way too heavy because they were full of fluid. And when I cut Kenty's lungs, bloody froth came out of his lungs, poured out of his lungs. How does that bloody froth form? When you get the water in your lungs, there's a lining on the air sacs in your lungs. It's a protein. The water mixes with the lining of your lungs, and it causes a hemorrhage to the lung. And then when I cut the lungs, I see that hemorrhage as a bloody froth. So I have 4 or 5 criteria, entities, whatever you want to call them, that I have used to determine Kente drowned. Now let me review it. The EMS report, water in the trachea, water in the sphenoid sinus, lungs that are full of fluid, too heavy, and then the hemorrhagic froth, bloody froth, which I see when I cut his lungs. And not another cause of death in the rest of the autopsy. No other catastrophic findings that I can say, well, he might have drowned, but he also had all these other things. He didn't have all that much stuff.
You talked about how heavy the lungs were. I want to approach you with State's Exhibit 99. Tell me if you recognize this document.
I do.
And what is that?
It's a section out of a textbook in my library back at the medical examiner's office called Pediatric Pathology. And in the textbook, they give you what are the expected weights of organs at different times in your life.
And is this a fair and accurate copy of that document from your own library?
Flip page 2. It is.
And would that aid in your testimony regarding describing the weight of Kente's lungs during autopsy?
It would.
Okay, Judge, at this time we'd ask to admit into evidence States 99 for demonstrative purposes.
So good.
Dr. Gallant, what is the normal weight of the lungs of a 10-year-old child?
The normal weight, according to the textbook, and it doesn't really matter if you're overweight or you're weighing about the same. At age 10, the right lung should weigh 177 grams, and the left lung should weigh 166 grams. The left lung is always a little lighter because the heart's in the way that it's growing, so the left lung is always a little lighter than the right lung.
And what were your findings as to the weight of Kente's lungs during the autopsy?
Well, let's go back and say the normal weight for the right side is 177. His right lung weighed 307. More than twice as much as it's supposed to weigh. On the left side, the normal weight is 166, and Kente's lung weighed 310. Again, more than twice as heavy as you would expect. Otherwise, you wouldn't get it. We've got to come up with a reason. The reason is that you're fluid, like a sponge. You weigh a sponge dry, which is how the lung is supposed to be, and it weighs X. You weigh a sponge full of water, and it weighs 2 or 3 times X. And that's all we're seeing here, is that we have an explanation for why his lungs are heavy.
You also described his lungs having a bloody froth. In your experience in doing autopsies, what does it mean, hypothetically, if you only had heavy lungs without the froth? What could be the cause of it?
Congestive heart failure, opiate overdose, head injury. There could be a bunch of things that would just produce heavy lungs without the froth.
What about if you only saw froth in the lungs? What would that potentially tell you?
Just froth.
Just froth.
I don't know if I've ever seen that.
Okay. But the combination that you observed, could there be any other cause other than drowning in what you saw?
Well, I never say never or always, but my opinion is that the froth that I see in his lungs are the result of drowning. If you have any more, if you want to give me some hypotheticals, I'm all for it, but I think we're going to go back to drowning.
You mentioned earlier in your testimony regarding specifically State's Exhibit 95, injuries in this area.
Back of the shoulder.
Now,
And one more, Counselor.
Not only
Put
the,
you on the pen. There you go.
not only the back of the shoulder here. If you remember when we talked about this before, we did what's known as a posterior dissection. And the bruise I circled there is in the muscle. You don't see it in the skin, couldn't see it from the outside of the body. Had to cut into the back of the shoulder to see it. So that's what we call a deep bruise. And then there was another one here, and then another one in this part, just above my collarbone.
I want to show you photograph of part of that interior, the posterior dissection.
Yeah. Yes.
And this is State's Exhibit 158. And did you photograph that injury that you saw?
I did.
Okay. And for State's Exhibit 158, explain to the jury the orientation. Would it be better if we did it this way?
Yeah, it probably would be a little better. This would be,
Oh, let me get you. Go ahead.
this would be towards the head, this would be towards the feet. If you can see these over here, these are the back, ribs in the back of your body.
Dr. Gott, do you mind stepping down and just showing
No.
the jury on my body where these
Sure.
injuries would be located so they know where they're looking?
Right here. And the other smaller bruises, there's one up here, and then there's one over here.
Okay. Tell the jury the significance of your findings in State's Exhibit 158 in regards to your cause of death finding of drowning.
Well, let me draw a circle around the area that's kind of black. That's all blood and the muscle, the bruise and the muscle. And you can see we have a ruler in there. I mean, that injury is probably, 1.5 by at least 1.5 inches. It's fairly big, particularly considering a 10-year-old kid. And it's on the back of his shoulder. So how does that injury get there? That's the next challenge I have. How does that injury get there? And the other ones that you showed on the body diagram get there?
And the consistency of the bruising, if you will, how would you describe that consistency?
Recent, extensive, deep.
What is it like comparable to the substance itself of the bruising?
It's just blood.
Okay.
Maybe I don't understand it.
Does it look like grape jelly?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I wasn't going to use that analogy.
Okay.
Uh,
But if you were to describe what you found, what it looks like,
Yeah, it looks like grape jelly.
and what is it about the consistency of it being like grape jelly that leads you to believe that it's a recent injury?
Sure, after a little while, the blood would, water would go out of it, and it would become dry feeling. It hasn't had an opportunity to do that, so it was inflicted fairly close to the time of death.
And what, if any, significance could be drawn between that type of injury corroborating that the victim was drowned?
Counselor, didn't you ask me a little while ago how long it would take to hold somebody under the water? Do you think if you had water in a tub and you just push somebody's head down, that they'd let you do that? They wouldn't let you do that any more than they let you burn your feet unless you held them. So to die from drowning, you have to hold somebody down. And I think the bruises on the back of the right shoulder and the bruises on the up here are indications that he was being held down at some time. Otherwise, I don't have any other explanation for that. That bruise that I have the two blue arrows pointing to, it's not underneath some belt buckle mark. It's not underneath some bruise that I can see on the skin. It's deeply inflicted, which often results from the palm of your hand, your knee, your elbow, something like that, that would hold somebody down for a sufficient period of time that they would drown.
The last thing I want to talk about, Dr. Gallett, is rigor. The jury's heard an explanation of rigor. It was based off of your line of work and what you do. Typically, approximately how long after death does rigor begin to set in?
It probably begins immediately, but it's not detectable for at least a couple of hours. And maybe as long as 4 to 6 hours, maybe as short as 2 hours. But I was very troubled, Counselor. Remember we asked earlier, what else do I do? Well, I looked at the ambulance trip, and I read that, and I didn't have an explanation.
And when you said you read that, specifically what did you read in that trip report that caused alarm?
Would you happen to have that in your hand right now?
I do not right now.
So I got it here. I'll find it. May I just read this stuff?
If you could read it to yourself, that refreshes your recollection as to what you saw that caused you concern.
I'm ready.
Okay, go ahead.
May I just read a verbatim out of here?
No,
Okay.
unfortunately, but just go
Well,
ahead.
in a narrative that's generated by the ambulance trip people, the last sentence of their narrative, or near the last sentence, says, his jaw was hard to open. You know, rigor mortis, she asked me earlier, when does it develop? It develops almost immediately. Where do you first notice it? In the jaw, because rigor mortis is a stiffening of the muscles, and the way you notice it is that the bigger the muscle group compared to the joint, the more prominent rigor seems to be. And what the ambulance trip people say here, they couldn't open his mouth very well because it was clenched together. Jaws were clenched together. And then they said rigor was also beginning in his feet, legs and feet. So why was I troubled by this? Because I know how long rigor mortis takes to develop. It's a couple of hours, sometimes longer. Yeah, this could be a little less than a couple of hours, but it generally doesn't develop 5 minutes after you're done. Body generally flaccid for a significant period of time. Significant period, a couple of hours probably. There have been a few reports of instantaneous rigor mortis. I've read them. They're all from the 50s and 60s. I've been involved in 35,000 death investigations. I've never seen a case of instant rigor mortis yet, and I probably never will.
Nothing further.
Good afternoon, Dr. Gallup.
Hey, Mr. Queen, good seeing you again. As always.
Thank you. So, Dr. Gallup, I know you got it there in front of you. What time was this child pronounced dead?
Pronounced? I might have a little trouble with that. Hold on. Mr. Queen, not to drag this out, but if you have a copy of my investigator's report handy, probably save us a lot of time. Never mind, I got it. Pronounced dead on April 28, 2017 at 9:04 p.m.
9:04 p.m. And you were telling us, just told me we were saying about rigor.
Yes.
And 9:04 p.m., let's go back 2 hours. That's around 7 o'clock.
Correct.
Okay. So it's possible this kid died around 7 o'clock.
It's certainly possible, sure.
But let's go back a little further. You talk about the trip log.
Right, that the ambulance trip report.
What time was this kid picked up?
Yeah, hold on. The call, you mind if I just rattle off these numbers?
Tell time to call.
The call was at 2020. I'm not much on military time, but I've learned how to convert it. So it's 8:20 p.m. in the evening.
Okay. And is that what time they arrived?
No, they arrived at 8:27, about 7 minutes later.
8:27.
Correct.
So let's go 2 hours before that. So that
6:27.
6:27.
Sure.
And you said AMS talks about rigor at 6:27 and at 8:27, right?
You know, I won't tell you it's exactly at 6:27, Mr. Queen, but sometime during their examination of Kente Williams, they described this.
Well, let's be clear. I just said 6:27. I misspoke. You said they arrived at 8:27, correct?
Yes.
Okay. They arrived at 8:27.
Correct. And then the next one at patient's side is 8:28.
8:28. So 8:28, we're going to assume they're by the patient's side, and therefore, that's when they're doing that examination.
Probably, because you know the next time, Mr. Queen, is 8:31, 3 minutes later, and it says they're in the middle of transport.
In the middle of
And then
transport.
they arrive at 8:50, 20 minutes later.
Okay.
So I mean, the whole time that they were there is less than an hour, a lot less than an hour.
Right, so we're talking roughly about 8:30 when they get the child on the rig for transport.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to look at it, sure.
And they comment that when they first encounter the child, they're difficult with the airway, and it seemed like the child may have been experiencing rigor at roughly 8:30.
Yeah, I don't know if that's what they first said, but at some point when they did their narrative, they noticed that his jaw was stiff and that his legs were getting stiff.
And that seemed to be because they were documenting how much trouble it was in order to provide services for this child.
Exactly.
Because
Hard to open his
if you
mouth.
can't open his mouth, it's hard to get a tube in.
Well, they managed to somehow, but they had difficulty doing it.
And that's at 8:30.
Correct.
But then you're talking about rigor, and you're talking about let's roll back the clock a little bit. So that puts then the child, I guess if you go by a standard, time of death around 6:30?
Yeah. I'd be careful of getting wedded to any specific times because rigor does develop differently in different people. We're just giving you ballparks and generalizations that it takes a couple hours to develop. Could it be a little longer? Well, sure. Could it be a little less? Of course. But in my experience, and in generally the experience of other forensic pathologists, it doesn't develop right away. So if at 8:30, the AMR people are saying that this child is already in rigor, I would have a lot of difficulty believing that he was dead only a few minutes at that point. And he's clearly dead when they get there.
Well, let's talk about that for a sec. 8:30, child is likely deceased. By AMR,
Oh, not likely.
AMR's pretty much
By
saying
any
he's deceased.
criteria, he's deceased.
Right.
He has no blood pressure, no pulse, no respirations, and his EKG strip is a straight line, what they call asystole.
Right, so when EMS pick him up, he's deceased.
Clear.
And basically, they try to resuscitate him to no avail.
Exactly.
So let's talk about 8:30. Let's stay at 8:30. 8:30, we rolled it back 6:30.
We could. Could roll him back farther.
Now, let me ask you this. You said at rigor, the number, is it solid or not?
It's not solid. It's approximations.
So if someone says they saw this child alive at 6:30, is that possible?
It's sure possible, sure. Remember, I don't get to examine the kid for a couple of days, so I have to rely on an ambulance trip report and assume that the information that's put in here is correct. You know, had one of my investigators, let's say he died at home and was never transported, one of my investigators gone to the scene and found a deceased child, he would have assessed whether there was rigor there. And with all due respect to the ambulance people, I would believe my investigators because they do this all the time.
Right. In this case, we're talking about 8:30. At 8:30 time that's not time you assigned.
No, that's the time that the ambulance trip people assigned.
Right. And then, of course, roll back to 6:30. Did you get any reports about witnesses seeing this child alive earlier that evening?
I do remember something vaguely about that. I don't recall exactly when.
Okay. Did you get reports stating this child was likely alive at 6:30?
He could have been.
7 o'clock?
Yeah, I hate to play that game with you, Mr. Clean, because if I say yes at 7, I know what the next question is. Is it 7:15? Is it 7:30? We're going to get them all the way up to 8 o'clock. I mean, you've got to understand, I'm sure you do understand, that these are approximations based on other people's examination of the child. And I think we all know in forensic medicine that rigor mortis is an approximation.
You know, I would not ever say, well, I walked into the room and the man was in full rigor, therefore he had to die at 6 p.m. that night, because I'd be laughed out of the office if I did that. He's been dead for a while. Could it be a couple of hours? Sure. I don't think I'm going to argue with you about any of your times. But the closer you bring it to 8 o'clock, the less likely it is.
I'm with you.
Is it fair
Yeah.
on that?
Fair enough.
Sure.
Because I guess we all get this impression, unfortunately based on television,
Whoa,
and we can set a time of death to an exact time.
Mr. Queen, television has done wonders for my salary and has been the bane of my existence in the courtroom. Because I have to undo all of the things these good people see on TV that they think that must be how it is, you know? I saw one show not too long ago, a fellow walked in, or a doctor walked into a room, there was a bitten apple at the scene, and the apple had turned brown, and he opined that the killer had to be gone no more than 15 minutes. You know, I could find you a bunch of apples and cut them here. Some would get brown in 15 minutes, and some 2 hours later still wouldn't be brown. So you got to understand, the TV is for entertainment. If they ever made a TV show about my life in the cat medical examiner's office, no one would watch it. They say it's way too dull.
But long and short of it is, based on your expertise, experience over these
34 years.
tens of years,
Yeah.
you can't tell exact time
No,
the
you know,
child.
and I wouldn't try to. We have a pronouncement time, but you're asking for something much more refined than a pronouncement time. You're asking, when was this child actually dead? Because I think you and I are in agreement. He was dead when the AMR people got there. How long before that was he dead? Based on their report, I'd say a while. Could be a couple of hours. Now, if their report is inaccurate, then all bets are off.
Okay. Now, let's talk for a minute about the manner of death.
Yes, sir.
In this case, the manner of death, what is it?
It's homicide.
It's
And
homicide.
I think I need to explain to everyone that in the world of forensic pathology, homicide does not equate to a murder. Murder is a legal term. Homicide simply means when I sign this report and I sign the death certificate at some exhibit over there, and I say the manner of death is a homicide, it means that I believe the life was taken by another person. Fair?
Fair enough.
Someone breaks into your house and you shoot them, and I have to do an autopsy on them, I'm going to call that a homicide. But I guarantee you, you're not going to be prosecuted for murder. It was a justifiable act. So, as long as we got that straight, I think we're better.
Now let's talk about cause of death.
Sure.
In this case,
Drowning.
drowning. Now, you were telling us about drowning, and a body's in water,
Yes, sir.
and a body drowns.
Correct?
Now, at what point is the demarcation that the person has drowned in that body of water?
No, when you say demarcation, I'm not quite sure what we're talking about.
What makes it exactly, when is it determined a drowning?
Well,
Let me give you an example.
sure.
I go to Lake Lanier. I jump off the pier at noon.
Okay,
I drown.
okay,
My family doesn't realize until 4 o'clock
sure.
that I'm in Lake Lanier. So, what time is it considered that I drowned?
Probably
When they
shortly
realize
after.
I'm dead, or when I die?
Did anybody see you go under? I don't mean to ask a rhetorical question.
Sure.
But if anybody saw you go under and they didn't see you come up, well, in the next 5 to 10 minutes, you drown. Unless you have, scuba gear on that we don't know about. And if you jump in the way you're dressed today, and I see you go under, and 10 minutes goes by, 5 to 10 minutes goes by, and you don't come up, unless he's James Bond that has one of these auction things down at the bottom of the lake, you drown. I'm sorry. But then, you confirm that with the examination of the body.
Now, in that case, you mentioned it takes minutes to drown,
It does.
but during that portion of time when you're in the water, is your body still taking in fluid?
You talking about the 4 hours that went by before you
4
were
hours,
Yeah.
correct.
But you gotta inhale the fluid. Once you stop breathing, water is not gonna get into your lungs.
So how long does it take in order to take in water?
Well, let's say you're being held under. Sooner or later, you're gonna open your mouth and take a breath. And that's when the first water comes in. You might be, if you're lucky, able to close your mouth for a little while, but you're gonna, the driving force in the brainstem to take a breath is gonna override you holding your breath, and you're gonna take in another volume of water. That's why I give it several minutes. People can struggle and fight, but sooner or later, in the next, 4 or 5, maybe a few more minutes, you're gonna take in enough water where you're dead.
How much water does it take to drown?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know. It depends on how much your lungs get filled up. I can tell you whatever it took, Kente sure had enough in there.
And beyond probably.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I couldn't go to the medical literature and say that if you inhale a quart of water, you're going to drown, but you only inhale two pints or half a pint, you won't. I don't know. I don't think anybody knows the answer to that.
Okay, let's switch gears for a sec.
Sure.
I know you and I have already talked about it. We talked about it previously. What's a dry drowning?
A dry drowning occurs in about 10% of drowning deaths. What happens when you inhale the water at first, the vocal cords in the larynx will go into spasm. And when they go into spasm, they come together. So no water can get past the vocal cords into your windpipe, down into your lungs. So when we autopsy somebody like that, and it is a small minority of the people, the lungs don't have any fluid. They look like everyday lungs. Might be a little overexpanded because you're trying to breathe. But you're not going to have the bloody froth that I described. You're not going to have the heavy lungs that I described. And that's what a dry drowning is, 10% or so. I see them every now and then, not too often.
And I guess that underlies how it doesn't, we can't really pinpoint how much water it takes for somebody to drown.
Well, you're exactly right. Now, actually, basically it's a little easier on a dry drowning because I know once the vocal cords go into spasm, you got 4 or 5 minutes, you're going to die unless the spasm is relieved somehow. You're not going to be able to get air from your mouth, back of your throat, down into your lungs. You got a barrier now when the vocal cords go into spasm. It's got a technical term called laryngospasm, but I think it's just easier to understand if we just talk about the vocal cords.
Now, does that same process with the laryngospasm occur in a wet drowning?
No, that's why your lungs are full of water. You generally would not get the laryngospasm in a wet drowning because the water, for whatever reason, your vocal cords don't spasm. I don't have a good reason why they don't or why they do. That's just what we've learned from investigation of drowning deaths. But in his case and in other cases, if you've got lungs that are twice as heavy as they should be and there's a bloody froth in them, that's not a dry drowning. I mean, it's against the definition of a dry drowning.
Now let's talk about Kente. We discussed that he drowned.
Yes, sir.
And that's beyond question, isn't it?
Well, you remember I said I never say never or always, but I'm not questioning anything about it. I think it's clear cut.
Because you talked previously about injuries to his body.
Sure.
And those injuries, those bruises, do they contribute to his death?
I don't think so, except for the ones on the back of his right shoulder, where I think he was held down. All the other myriad of injuries that we've spent, a good part of this afternoon discussing indicate that he underwent some type of a beating. But had he not been drowned, and I'm including his feet on this too, had he not been drowned, more likely than not, he would have survived those injuries. I didn't see any injury that I would say, well, it doesn't matter whether he drowned. This would have been the end of him anyway. All the other injuries, the patterned ones, the burned feet, the ones that I couldn't categorize as patterned or not, they're all relatively superficial and certainly non-fatal.
Now let's stay there for a second. let's talk about the feet for a moment.
Sure.
Now, in this case, unfortunately, it looks like the CAB PD didn't go out. Did you get a measure the temperature of the
I can only
water?
control what my office does. I can't control what other offices.
Well, the CAB medical examiner, the CAB police.
Well, we're not related. You know, I don't work for the police. I don't work for the district attorney, for that matter.
Now,
Or other attorneys, let's just leave it at that.
now, in this case, the CAB police, they didn't measure the temperature coming out that faucet, correct?
Correct.
In no point in time did anyone provide you that information as to what that temperature is coming out that faucet.
That's right.
Because you mentioned that the water, if it's super hot, 140,
Yeah,
coming
I
out
don't
that
know if you can
faucet.
get it up that hot in a standard hot water heater. I don't know, I'm not a plumber, but I know you can get it up that hot in industrial situations, and that's how that timing came about. But assuming that it was 140, 1 second, assuming that it was 130, 2 to 3 seconds, assuming that it was 120, 4, 5, 6 seconds. And I think if you go down below that, you don't have hot water anymore,
Okay.
You have lukewarm water, which isn't gonna do much to you.
So generally, we're talking at least 2 to 5 seconds.
Yeah, I think a short period of time, but what I tried to convey before, unless you're held under there, you're gonna move your feet. You're gonna move your legs out of the way.
And then the way in which the pattern is on the feet, it appears as though Kente may have been more of a supine position.
Well, I don't think that's true. I think he would have been in the tub. You can put him in any position you want, but his feet have to be in contact with the enamel. Bottoms of his feet have to be in contact with the enamel part of the tub because they didn't get burned. Only the tops of his feet got burned.
But what if he's laying down in the faucet?
I agree with you. If he's laying on his back and he's got his knees arched up, that's certainly possible.
And those injuries, as you stated, painful, not life-threatening.
Not life-threatening, but it hurts.
And generally, something you can get treated for at home or hospital.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we've all had second-degree burns. Probably most of us don't even go to the doctor, but the extent of his, I think, would have warranted him being brought to a medical facility for some type of evaluation.
Now, you mentioned the other pattern injuries, which appear consistent with the belt.
Yes, sir.
Now, you've had the clothes, the shirt and the pants, reportedly worn by him that evening.
Correct.
And can you make a determination whether he was wearing or not wearing those clothes at the time of the belt whipping?
I really stay away from that. I would say with a great deal of confidence that the belt impacted the back of his white shirt. That does not mean that he was wearing it at the time that happened. I would say that the other clothes didn't really help me much in the evaluation of his death.
Okay. Now, on the shirt, you noted how the marks are consistent with the belt.
Yes, sir.
Now, when you go back to Kente's body, as you said, the shirt, he could have been wearing it. It could have possibly been on. He was like maybe using it as like a little shield.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you're right.
Either way.
Either way.
Now, did you see any open wounds due to what looked like?
No, I've gone back and looked at that a couple of times. Unless you take the resuscitative injuries as open wounds, prior to resuscitation, he had no open wounds. And even during and after resuscitation, I'm not sure that he did. What I'm trying to convey is that, can you bleed from having an endotracheal tube put in your throat? Well, sure you can. Can you bleed from having IV stuck in you? Well, sure you can. So there may have been blood at that point in time, but prior to that, I don't see any open wounds in Kente. He's got bruises, he's got scrapes, he's got deep bruises, he's got evidence of drowning. None of those are open wounds.
Let's stay with the bruises for a moment. You mentioned he appeared to have older injuries.
Yeah, he has some scars. Yeah.
And tell us again, those scars, can you date them?
Not any more than they're at least a month old, but they could be anywhere from a month to years. And there's no pattern to them. I have no idea how those scars came to be.
And I guess finally, let's talk about those deep bruises.
Yes, sir.
And the one to the neck, I guess to the
Right shoulder, back of the right shoulder.
Back of the right
That's
shoulder.
the most prominent one.
Actually, let's talk about the one to the, what was it, around the scapula?
Well, that's the most prominent one. He had another just above the clavicle, just above the collarbone as well.
That one.
Yeah.
And what is that consistent with?
Well, if I look at the entire compilation of bruises on the back of his shoulders, it's consistent with him being held down. If you just isolate that bruise all by itself, Mr. Quinn, may not mean much of anything. But you know, we try to look at things in patterns and compilations and not, you know, I don't want to operate in a vacuum. What does this one bruise mean? Or what does this other bruise over here mean? Typically, an isolated bruise may not mean much of anything.
Because that one isolated bruise, is that consistent with an object, a hand?
It's consistent with a hand, but it's also consistent with a blunt object. You know, a bruise is a blunt force injury, and there are myriads of things that can cause blunt force injuries.
And in this case, you mentioned a bruise caused by blunt force injury.
Yeah, all bruises are that way.
Now, and that blunt force injury could be caused by a hand, correct?
Sure.
But it could be caused by an object in a hand making contact with the skin.
Sure. All you need, Mr. Queen, is to rupture the blood vessels beneath the skin. They bleed. Now look at the person, they got a bruise. If it's a pattern, I'm lucky. If it's no pattern, no pattern, then it could be a whole lot of things.
Going to the one in the back. Because your theory is that it was caused basically by holding him down.
Yeah, and when you say theory, I think we got to, at least I have to express that he's not going to stay under the water all by himself. He's going to resist. So I think he had to be held in some manner. And the manner that I see is the bruises on the back of his shoulder. I'm not telling you I'm right about that, by the way. I'm just saying, when I try to put the injuries together, that's what I see. Somebody else might see something else.
But that same bruise could have been caused earlier by blunt force contact.
I would not argue with you at all.
So Dr. Gallup, in this case, Kente drowned.
Clearly.
And likely he was held under the water for some period of time.
I believe he was.
And we don't have anyone to tell us precisely that they timed how long it took Kente to die, correct?
Correct.
And then we have that Kente at some point in time appears that he was likely beaten with a belt,
It does.
clothed, unclothed.
Maybe both, but clearly unclothed.
So can you tell us definitively what time and who caused these injuries to
Oh,
Kente?
no, I can't tell you who did it. Counselor, that wouldn't be part of the medical examiner's job. I'm here representing Kente and what injuries he had. I can't be any more specific with times that we've already hashed over, and I certainly can't tell you who did this.
Thank you.
You ready?
No, you're not.
Thank you, Dr. Gavin. Good to see you.
Judge Bush, good seeing you again.
Good to see you. Hey, do you have any other?
Your Honor, it is time to state rest.
Ladies and gentlemen, please retire to the jury room for a few minutes. I'm going to give you some instructions and ask you a couple of questions which you need to answer yes or no. You need to consult with your attorney, feel free to do so. The state has concluded the presentation of its evidence, so now it's your opportunity to present any evidence you wish to present, including testifying on your own behalf. Whether or not you testify is your decision, not your attorney's decision or anybody else's decision. But again, if you need to consult with your attorney and get his advice, please feel free to do so. So first of all, do you understand that?
Yes, sir.
All right. If you choose to testify, you'll be treated just like any other witness. You'll be sworn in, examined, and cross-examined just like any other witness about your testimony and anything relevant to your testimony in the case. I will instruct the jury that they should treat your testimony just like that of any other witness. If you choose not to testify, I will instruct the jury that they may hold that against you in any way. So you understand that?
Yes, sir.
Have you decided what you want to do, or do you need to discuss it further with Mr. Queen?
Need a little time, please, sir.
Okay. Well, why don't y'all talk about it? How long you need?
10:15?
Okay. 5:15. Mr. Williams, have you decided what you want to do?
Judge, I think we decided we'd like more time to make a decision.
Why do you need more time?
Mr. Williams, he'd like to consult with his family, he'd like to consult with me a little further. And then, of course, Mr. Williams, he has this, as you heard in the statement, coming and going laryngitis. So he doesn't sound very good right now. I can pretty much tell the court, outside of Mr. Williams, I have 5 character witnesses. They're all going to be very short. I can't imagine them taking no more than an hour total on his behalf. They'd be called in this case. So with or without Mr. Williams, I testify positive will be closing Friday.
Ladies and gentlemen, as you heard, the state is arrested, which means they concluded the presentation of their evidence. So the defendant may now present any evidence he wishes to present. Since it's almost 5:30, we will recess until Friday at 9 o'clock, at which time the defendant may present any evidence he wishes to present. As to how long that may take, I don't know, but I don't think it will go beyond Friday. Whether you begin deliberations Friday is another question. So the case could go into Monday. It will not come back on Saturday or Sunday. So tomorrow you can do whatever you wish to do. You go to work, go shopping, sleep in, whatever. But that has nothing to do with the case. As you've seen, there are cameras in the courtroom, so there's some publicity. Avoid watching any news reports or reading or listening to any news reports that may be about the case. Don't look up anything. Don't discuss it with anyone. If you made any notes, take your pads home with you this time. Bring them back with you Friday morning. Wear your badges home, wear them when you return. Anybody have any questions? All right. Excuse until Friday at 9.